Hello, hello, hello. This is a special edition for the B'nai Academy, Torah for the Gentiles. My name is Rabbi Weinberg. I was asked by our director, Rabbi Bashevitsky, to share Jewish insights that are applicable for the world. Just to give you some background, a little street cred. Thank God I've written over 40 books on Judaism, Jewish mysticism. You can check out my writings on KabbalahWisdom.org. And I'm thrilled to be with you today to share the 10 absolute hashgacha pratis. What is hashgacha pratis? You know, very important to understand that wisdom is developed over time. Abraham came around to the world and he said, by the way, guys, the world is not run by many gods. Actually, there's one God, and this one God runs the whole program. And as Judaism develops, and of course Judaism is for the whole world, the Torah is not exclusive. We know that in Judaism you have basically a two-track system. The system for Jews and the system for Gentiles. The system for Jews, of course, includes not only Jewish philosophy and truth, but also the laws, the mitzvahs. There are 613 commandments in the Torah for Jews, as well as there are 7 what we call Noahide laws. These 7 laws were originally, 6 of them were given to Adam, and 1 of them was given to Noah, were all the children of Adam and Noah, and therefore these laws are applicable to us all, and they were canonized in the Torah. Of course, the Torah can only be understood when it is included with, sorry, there's a little helicopter going on in the background, so you'll have to give me a moment. When the Torah is included with its commentary, not only a commentary, but its actual tradition of what it means. You see, the Torah itself is like headlines. And these headlines, effectively, like a newspaper article, it's just a tiny, tiny point. But the actual article can be very, very detailed. Similarly, the Torah gives us a very, very succinct line, like keep the Sabbath. But how do you keep the Sabbath? What is the Sabbath? There's a tremendous amount of details that go into that. And so within the Torah, when God gave the Torah to Moses, he also gave 4 levels of interpretation. And the first is called pshat, which is kind of the basic meaning. So an eye for an eye never meant, God forbid, to take out somebody's eye. What it meant is that the value of an eye, which if God forbid you sold a slave minus an eye, you could figure out the value of an eye. And therefore all these things, what they are the actual structure of the Torah. I don't want to go too deep into this because it's an entire class on its own, but what I do want to say is that within the Torah itself there are 7 specific laws for the entire world. And of course we know that humanity without God, without religion, is basically quickly devolves into chaos, into immorality, and to self-destruction. So keeping the Torah and keeping these laws are keeping yourself alive, quite literally. And of course, on a more spiritual level, it merits you heaven, it merits you the world to come, it merits you the times of Mashiach. Anytime you do the will of God, you get the blessings of God as well. Without further ado, in the evolution of the spiritual understanding of God, we began with Abraham. Of course, there was the revelation of Matan Torah when God gave us the Torah, but even then you can look at religion in a certain sense as a structure. Okay, there's a God, he's maybe a little separate to us, and here is what he wants. But along comes the Baal Shem Tov, and there's something called Pnimis HaTorah, the inner dimension of the Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that in fact God is continuously with us. And this is called Hashgacha Pratis. And there are 10 ways we see Hashgacha Pratis. And I'm going to go through these 10 ways. And I really, really encourage you, if this is meaningful to you, to please forward this. This is a collection of thousands of years of information. Obviously, it's on one specific point, but still, to get to this point took thousands of years of great rabbis teaching us about God, and it really, really is the sum total of truth. Obviously, truth is infinite. There's more to always learn. Obviously, there's more than we'll ever know. But when it comes to what we need to know, how to function, this really, really does summarize it all in 10 ways that God is constantly with us. And so without further ado, let us begin with way number 1. The first way is within the physical world itself. Now, we know that this world is a world in which, from the perspective of science, it's not that God made the world once upon a time. It's that God continuously recreates the world. And so what we are experiencing now is not a different time to creation. It's actually the very same moment of creation. And one of the ways we understand this is, let's say I'm holding up this napkin over here. Now, imagine if in my imagination I imagine a napkin and a napkin comes into existence. So the question would then be, how long would the napkin exist? And the answer is, as long as I imagine it, because it doesn't have any intrinsic existence. Its existence is dependent. There's intrinsic existence, and the only intrinsic existence that exists is God. Every other existence, as the Rambam teaches us, is what we would call dependent existence. And if this is dependent on my thinking it into existence, just imagine for a moment a napkin in your brain. How long will your napkin exist? As long as you imagine it. The second you stop imagining your napkin disappears. And the same thing is, before time and space, there was nothing. And God created time and space. In fact, one of the original books on God is called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, by Avraham Avinu. Abraham was a great researcher into God, obviously. And Abraham teaches us that the universe is made up of 3 dimensions: time, space, and soul. And there are many types of souls. There are animals, there are humans. We have obviously different souls. Animals can't speak, but they can reason somewhat. There are trees, which we don't think that they have much intelligence, but they do grow. Then there are even rocks and minerals, which it doesn't seem like they're alive, even though they do have a great life force in them. So, in other words, what's very, very critical to understand is that we are living in kind of a simulation. Now imagine a computer screen. Right now you're looking at a screen. Everything you see right now is being simulated, right? What is it really? It's information. And so God, in the first moment of time, created what's called koyach hiyuli. A very, very basically, science tells us that, it's unbelievable to think about. Think about the expanse, all the matter that exists. All of it is literally the size of one electron. So all the things that exist really come from a primordial beginning. Even science has discovered there was what they called a Big Bang, but it wasn't a Big Bang, it was the original point of creation. And God created one tiny, tiny speck like one electron. And from there, he separated that into billions and trillions and gazillions of, obviously atoms and electrons. And eventually, he makes that, basically, there are only a couple of elements. According to science, basically, they think with string theory, it's all one thing, it's just different frequencies. But even if you want to say there's only 110 basic elements, only 110 different atoms, and those combined, like H2O, which is 2 oxygen atoms with 1 hydrogen, that makes water. And then sodium chloride and all these different things. So in other words, the whole world is just 110, let's say, building blocks, different shapes, and then you put it together and you get new shapes. Just like colors, basically only 3 colors, and those colors make millions and billions and trillions of colors. So what we see from this is something very, very important. And that is that we are existing in an infinite universe. And that's very important to understand, because a finite universe would mean that God created it and he let go of it. But that cannot happen because it doesn't have inherent existence, exactly like the screen. The screen cannot exist without the computer. Now, the screen is there, but it doesn't have any information. It doesn't have any shapes. It doesn't have any purpose. It has nothing. And so too, even if you want to say the matter in the universe exists, but still for it to get shaped and for us to have meaningful lives, etc., all of it has to come from an infinite intelligence design. So one of the ways we see the continuous hand in God is in continuous creation. There's another way we see the continuous hand of God, and that is in the spinning. Again, this is from the Rambam, one of the great Jewish philosophers, Maimonides. The very fact that the sun is moving all the time, that the planets, that every single thing is on a perfectly timed cycle, to the perfection, to the microsecond. These are massive, massive bodies, and yet everything is working to the microsecond. Now, some people might think, because we have a tendency to try to explain away God, oh, well, there was maybe a big bang and it got thrown out. But the only problem with that theory is that if I take a ball and I throw it, what will happen is eventually it will lose speed. And if it's going on a very, very fast speed, then it actually is getting kind of faster as it leaves, but then it goes slower. So if something is going on a consistent speed, right? If I just threw this, then you see what happens. But if it consistently goes at the exact same speed, infinitely, then obviously something magical is taking it along its way, and that, of course, is God. So we see God in the movement. Now remember, everything is moving. Within you is more atoms than there are stars in the universe, which is 100 billion times 100 billion. You're talking so many things are moving all the time. Miracles upon miracles upon miracles. But it gets deeper than that. Rabbi Dr. Twersky, who wrote over 80 books, was a great rabbi, psychiatrist. He said that it's just the creation of a human being. I spoke to, in fact, he wasn't a believer, but he was a Jew. He was a professor from Cambridge. He was a professor in reproductive science, the first person to actually measure the size of a human egg. He said he believes in evolution. Think about it, he said. Evolution took, 4 billion years to create one rat. And one rat creates a rat in 27 days. It's impossible. I was friendly with Dr. Paul Wildman from Geneva, who supervises all the studies of all the universities in Switzerland. And his board, he told me, was the highest paid student in the world. His board sent him around the world just to find out the latest discoveries on science. And after he did that, now imagine a guy with 3 PhDs, not one but 3, comes back and he gives a lecture of everything he discovered. And the lecture was entitled, as he told me, The Limit of Human Intelligence. As he told me, we have discovered in every single field we now know that it is a miracle. For example, the splitting of a DNA. Everything is functioned on the splitting of a DNA. Every tree, every rat, every person, everything. And yet, nobody knows how that happens. Imagine you take 5,000 books. I've got a book in front of me. And, right, this is one small book. Imagine 5,000 big, thick books. Here, I've got some writing here. Now, cut it in half. Even if you were able to say there were building blocks and letters, what's the chance that one page, those letters would come and make the same other half? It's not possible. And yet, what's the chance on not one page, on 200 pages? Now, 200 pages times 5,000, that's happening every microsecond. Your blood, the main blood cells that you have, the main cells that we have, 80% of our cells are basically red blood cells. Every single second, as I've spoken here, billions have died and come to life. Every single second, you lose 1 million and gain 1 million. So what you can see from this is that our life is constantly a creation of God. Very important point. Constant creation. We are in, basically, it's a real world because it's created by God. It's not that it isn't real, but its only existence is God himself. And the information that makes it work the way it works is exactly like a computer putting something on a screen. That is our whole reality. So is God involved in the world? The answer is, if he wasn't involved, the physical wouldn't exist. We now know that the physical world pops in and out of existence. We know this from science, even though it's amazingly, Kabbalah spoke about this thousands of years ago. You can look on my website. I have a video about it. There's also a quantum physics video called What the Bleep Do We Know? And it shows us that everything is constantly coming in and out of existence all the time. And so this shows us step number 1, the very first thing, that God is consistently involved in your life. If he wasn't involved in your life, if he wasn't involved, there would be no life. The physical world exists exclusively because God, this very moment, is making it exist. And not only is he making it physically exist, he's making every nuance, every single factor, just like your computer. So imagine a computer that could literally make a screen, and then everything that goes on in the screen is being made by the computer at the same time. And that is what's happening. Billions and trillions and an infinite amount of different bodies and creatures and everything, and it's all being run by God. So the greatest secret of life is that God is hiding himself. The word olam, the word world, comes from the word helim, concealment. God is concealing his existence within the nature. But the fact of the matter is, when you scientifically go down into nature, when you look at it and you analyze it, it has to have a creator, not only creating its physical existence, but every component, its information, everything. I mean, even the fact that each one of us is DNA, and that DNA is the exact code of a human being. It's unbelievable. So to think that you could literally take a cell, and you can crack open the little capsule that holds the DNA. It's 6 feet long. The DNA within you, just the strands, are enough to wrap around the world 3 times. That's how much DNA you have in us. And that DNA is just kind of being created out of nothing all the time. And so that shows that this whole thing is 100% being given life and existence by God himself. Thank you for watching the first episode of how we see God's constant involvement in the world. And now we're going to head to episode number 2.